Recording. So just for everyone's reminder, this meeting is recorded. We ask that that everyone, that when you're not actually looking to speak, if you could remain on mute so that we keep the background noise with the call in line, so it's not. Gonna also remind you that there is the chat button, that round circle, which should be up on the right-hand side of your screen, or if you want to ask a question or make a comment or something, you can also do it in there, as well as doing it openly. So with that, let me turn back to the bishop and ask him to open us with prayer.
Thank you very much, Alec, and welcome everybody on a rainy Friday afternoon before a long weekend. I don't know if a long weekend means much in the current situation, but I hope you have a great Victoria Day weekend, everybody, as you gather together. I'm coming to you from a different location today. I've been trying to sell my house, and it's been a bit more challenging, but the real estate agent wants to show somebody the house at 2:15, so I've been banished out to my RV, or as my children like to refer to it, Dad's treehouse. So I'm out in my treehouse, and this is where I'll do the call from today. So it's great to be with you. So let's get started with prayer. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for the gift of this day, made ever more beautiful by the gift of your never-failing presence with us through your Son, Jesus Christ, who attends to us as we continue through this great season of Easter, and we give thanks for the life, death, and resurrection of your Son. We now begin to turn our hearts and our minds towards the great feast of Pentecost, and celebrate the unity that we share in his body, the church, and the world. In the challenges that we're facing in the church, not only within our diocese, but across the country and around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic, we give thanks that that spirit continues to bind us closely together one to another, that you give us wisdom and vision and insight, that you inspire us to meet these days in courage and confidence and hope. As we come to this meeting today, I give thanks for the leaders across our diocese who gather this day, for the wardens, treasurers, and clergy, and the people that they serve within the Diocese of Ontario. Be present with us today, strengthen us, encourage us, and show us the way forward that you would have us go. In Jesus' holy name we pray. Amen. Okay, we're going to follow a similar format to what we've done on previous Fridays. I'm going to kick it off and then hand it over to Archdeacon Varley and then to Alec, who will update you on a number of things from his front. Again, this week, I don't have a great deal to bring to you by way of update, other than to let you know that the bishops of the province continue to meet. We met on Tuesday and had a lengthy conversation, and that conversation is now beginning to turn to what's going to happen as the phases of opening up the province, and that's the civil province, and the medical authorities begin to give their advice on how to do that. How's that going to affect the church? How's that going to affect how we operate moving into the future? So first thing that's going to happen, the executive officers, and Alec might reference that in his time, but the executive officers met as well, and we're going to have a joint meeting with the bishops of the province and all the executive officers on Tuesday, and the topic of conversation is going to be how do we begin to look at how we move out of the strict pandemic restrictions that have been in place? And what I've been saying to people who ask, when the time comes, it's not going to be flipping the switch, or as they say in the great hymn, fling wide the gates. It's going to be more like turning up a rheostat gently and slowly, and we see that in the advice that's coming to us from the provincial leaders, from the health officials, from our government officials, who are saying they want to continue to monitor closely what's happening. They want to be careful because we've made such progress on this. And it's interesting because across our diocese, we've seen the challenges and the hopes played out within it. Kingston, Frontenac, Lennox, and Addington, the numbers that I have seen, they've recorded 61 cases, all of which have been resolved. Nobody's in ICU, nobody has died, and we managed to keep it out of the long-term care homes. that's been there. You go down to the east end of the diocese, and it's been much more challenging. And I know there's been numbers in the west end of the diocese, but it's been a bit of a patchwork quilt, and with no rhyme or reason as we continue to try to understand how this virus is transmitted. One of the things that we're going to be doing as we meet, we have contacted or in the process of contacting an epidemiologist who's going to give us some advice and move forward, because we have very particular things related to the church. And one of the things we want to do when we advocate, not only just as Anglicans, but together with our ecumenical brothers and sisters, is we want to be able to say to the government in the phased opening that the churches is not like opening up the Cineplex Odeon Theater. We're not a concert venue. It's very much different. Our life together, our worshiping life, but also our pastoral life and the care that we provide, and the importance of that related to our own community and the wider society in what we provide. So I'm very hopeful for those meetings next week. So that's basically everything, I think, unless there was something, Alec, or Wayne, that I might have left out in my presentation. But I'm looking forward to that conversation on Tuesday, and then we'll continue to feed this back to you at the meetings on Friday, and then as we update our pandemic guidelines on the hub. So we continue to move through. Again, before I hand it off to Wayne, to extend my deep thanks and appreciation, I want to do that every week, to all of you as leaders for what you're doing, the care that you're taking, the intentionality, the stewardship that you are showing in the care of your people, and the responsibilities that have been entrusted to us. It just is remarkable to work with you on that. And I look forward to as we continue to move. We're moving into month 3. It's interesting. We started this on the 14th of March, and I chuckled about the fact that we were a bit ahead of the government. I said it's nice to be ahead of the curve for a change, because we instituted our lockdown on the 14th, and the government came out on the 17th of March. So we are moving into month 3 of this, and as the experts tell us, it's going to take us some time to work through. So that, again, with that word of thanks and appreciation, and again at the end of our session today, any questions that you have for me, Wayne, or Alec, will be happy to answer, or take a stab at answering, or finding an answer for you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Archdeacon Varley.
Friends, it's good being with you again this week, and I just want to provide a brief update about our pastoral guidelines. They were included in the invitation of this meeting, and they now reside on our diocesan website. The applicable version is version number 8. There are 2 additions to the document. One is actually at the end of it in the home prayers section. We've included an additional resource that you may wish to use from a community in Ireland. It's called Prayers for Community in a Time of Pandemic. And they're writing some beautifully rich prayers each day as the pandemic progresses. And I leave them with you for your personal and church use. The second edition is in the Building and General Ministry Guidelines. There's a further bullet point in respect of cemeteries. We have roughly 50 cemeteries in our diocese, and earlier this week I participated in a webinar that involved the CEO, Carrie Smith, of the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. He had presented on a number of administrative matters, including cemeteries. And interestingly enough for me, when it came to the question and answer portion of the gathering, probably half or more of the questions centered around cemeteries. Can they be shut? Should they remain open, or should they be closed? Based on Carrie Smith's advice, participating in that webinar, and our diocesan strategy of using abundant caution in order to maximize safety and health, the guideline remains that our diocesan cemeteries should remain closed, except for the purposes of a graveside service or interment, respecting physical distancing with a maximum of 10 people plus funeral staff, and also for essential safety matters, and this includes grass cutting and monument stabilization. For example, someone could enter our cemeteries and slip, fall, and injure themselves on wet grass. They may fall and injure themselves over a gravestone. Therefore, grass cutting is deemed essential. And as I said, monument stabilization is a long-standing guideline and practice for cemetery boards and committees to follow, and that is reiterated at this time. Monument construction is not deemed to be essential and ought not be taking place in our cemeteries until further notice. So that is a brief update about version 8 of our ministry pastoral care and worship guidelines, and I trust you will refer to them on a regular basis. Over to you, Alec. Thank you all.
Great, thanks, Wayne. Let me just get my screen share going here. Get it into presentation mode. Come on now. Great. So we're now down to the last couple of items. So let me begin by, last week I showed you a chart that had a tick mark on it, and it said that, you know, we'd received notification from the CRA that we've been approved. So this week we actually have 4 tick marks. We have that data collection exercise, which, and again, thank you to all our churches, the treasurers in particular, for the quick response. That data was all pulled together along with our payroll information. That then led to our application. We passed that milestone. We this week have received the funds from the CRA. That is in 2 forms, because we had to apply. You have to apply for the temporary wage subsidy first, which is caps out at $25,000, and that piece is in place. And then the balance, which as you can see is just a little under $160,000, which the balance would be $135,000, was received this week in our account. That money has now gone into credits in your church accounts. And as of this morning, the payroll invoices for April were sent out. That invoice includes, and the treasurers would be most familiar with this, includes your normal breakdown of your payroll costs, your clergy, any lay staff, how that's broken down. It will also contain the breakdown of the emergency wage subsidy that was applied, how it was calculated and applied for each church. Those invoices went out this morning, and Joyce advised me that the statements for April are now complete, and they too are going out this afternoon. So by the end of today, the treasurers, you should have both invoices, and that will show how the credit subsidy was applied, as well as your statement that shows your current with that reflected in it. So that was for the first of the 4-week periods. And as you recall, the second, there are 3 periods in the program, and we have actually we're just out of the second window. What the government has announced that if you qualified for the first period, then you're deemed to be qualified for the second period. So we will need to put the application back in, but we don't need to put any of the supporting pieces in. They simply now are deeming, if you qualify for one, you qualify for the second, but not a third. So we will shortly be working our way through getting our submission for the second period. That work will be done this week, and we will then, well, that will mostly be the same amount. There'll be some variability because there are folks that are based on hourly input, but for the most part, it will be pretty close to what was in March. And the timing of the payment is not clear yet. It's within 10 days of when we apply. And so our intention is we will get the application in, receive the funds, and be able to include that credit on the May payroll. However, to get the third period, we will need to reapply, and that means that we're going to have to come back out and collect revenue information, income information, as we did previously in terms of how much it was down. Because for the third period, for May, we have to be 30% down in total in order to qualify. So that's now a separate qualification from previous. We won't know until we collect that info. So the end of the first week of June, we'll be sending you the form to be filled out. Again, very simple, on how much your April income was, how much your May income was, how much it was in April of 2019, how much it was in May of 2019. We'll be requesting that info early in June, which isn't that far off. We will then consolidate that, and if we are eligible, we will then reapply. What we heard this last Friday was that the federal government, the Prime Minister, announced they intended to extend this program. What I just received a news flash that the government has announced that this the emergency wage subsidy will now be extended out to the end of August. So that means that originally it was March, April, and May. It's now being extended to June, July, and August. And again, it appears the qualifications and process will be the same. So we will do our work for June. If we are eligible, then obviously we'll take that benefit. And if we're not, then we'll collect it again the following month, because you can be not eligible in one period, but still apply in the next if you are eligible. So this benefit should then be extended if we are down 30%. And that's something that remains to be seen. So just to wrap this piece, you will get in your statements today and your invoices the first reflection of this. We are deemed eligible for the second period, and that'll be on your May statements. And then we're going to need to reapply early in June for the third period, which is May. So the other topic that we talked about last week, and I thought it was worth spending a few minutes trying to get to this, because this is an area that a lot of people get confused by, as well as the fact that it has changed somewhat. And that's around copywriting. So just a quick sort of basis for this. So the copyright is actually a collection of rights that someone that creates something, and whether you create by writing a book, whether you create by writing a poem, a hymn, words, whether you write music, whether you create a movie, whether you create software, you are automatically vested as you own the rights to what you have created. And of course, there are a lot of people that make their living from writing, composing, performing, etc. And these rights also include the right to reproduce things, so be able to take copies of the music that I've written and it can be reproduced, but it also includes performance, or in the case of visual things, displaying things. So it extends beyond just a piece of paper that we would talk about typically and when we would copy hymns or music in the old days. So churches have always been liable to respecting copyright. And things, I think what we kind of don't grasp when we complain about how much that darned hymn book cost us, it cost us $45 to buy a hymn book, and somebody somewhere's ripping us off. Well, apart from the cost of the paper and the binding, and apart from the cost of the printing and the cost of distributing it, each piece of music and each set of words, in this case, in that hymn book, has a license associated with it. And so the people that have published the book pay each author or each composer their right for each license. So for example, if you have a hymn in the book, you might, for example, get 10 cents a copy that's reproduced. And so there are rights associated with each of them. And I'll show you a little bit more of that in a minute. And again, words and music, while we think of a hymn as both together, are typically separate things. That someone wrote the music, someone else wrote the words. And so there is a copyright which exists around both of those things. The performance is exempted, or sorry, is also copyright. So for example, if you, if we wanted to stage a production of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, then Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, who wrote the thing, are actually entitled legally to a fee for the performance of that. Where there's always been an exemption is for music that is performed in church as part of a worship service. And there's an organization called SOCAN that administers the rights, particularly in the performance area. And you would deal with SOCAN in a number of areas. If we wanted to put on a performance of Joseph, you would, through SOCAN, pay that right, the fee for that right, to the people that hold the rights on it. Similarly, by the way, if you're playing at your coffee hour playing music, or at a tea, technically, if you're to the letter of the law, you're responsible to pay SOCAN for using someone's music during that time, because it's not a worship service. And so but SOCAN offers an exemption for music performed as part of worship. When you buy a hymn book, as I mentioned, you are paying a license for each one that's in there. There's also the law that says after someone dies, a composer passes away, then there's varying numbers, 20, in most countries it's 50, some it's 75, that after their copyright lasts for 50 years. Unless, of course, they sold it to a publisher like Oxford, and they choose to renew it. But if you look in our hymn book, and I'll show you an example of this in a minute, there are both currently licensed pieces in there, which would require you, if you wanted to print it, to have a license. And there's also public domain hymns, music and words, that don't require a license because the rights have expired. Just as a note, anthems and choir music, you can be subscribing to things like CCLI or One License, those types of things. But typically anthems and choir music aren't covered under those things. They need to be covered by purchasing either the right per copy or an actual copy. So people ask, well, how do I tell if the hymn we're singing on Sunday is public domain, or whether it's covered by copyright? Well, I've just done a cut here. This is hymn 525 out of the book, that Chestnut, the Church's One Foundation. The text for that was written by Samuel John Stone, who passed away in 1900. The alt simply means that they've changed the words, typically around inclusive language or other little bits of things they do. But those, you see no copyright listed against it. So those words can freely be reprinted. The music, the great Samuel Sebastian Wesley, that is also now in public domain, long since. So obviously neither his estate or one of the original publishers has extended that out. So that particular hymn, you could print hundreds and hundreds of copies. You can perform however you like. There are no copyright issues associated with this. And that right out of our book, Common Praise. Let me pick another one. So here's hymn 642. This hymn, the text is by a lady named Shirley Arena Murray, and that has been published by Hope Publishing. And so that is covered. The music by this is by our own cathedral organist, Michael Capon. Obviously, Michael is still quite well, and that's, as you see, followed by copyright. So in this case, to print the words or the music, you require a license to be able to do that. And that means that at the end of the day, both the author and the composer get their share of fees back. So there's two examples, one where you can print and reproduce, you can project it, you can do whatever you like to your heart's content. The second one, for it to be used outside of a worship context or reproduced, requires a copyright. So lots of churches are indeed copyright or are indeed reproducing things outside of a book. You know, many of our churches have gone to projection systems of one type or another. If you are reproducing one that is public domain, no issue. If you're doing one that is not public domains covered, then that requires a light permission of the copyright holder. And the way that that's done typically is to make it easy, because in some cases, for example, if you wanted to make a recording, a record, then you would go to each of the composers of who you wanted, and you would ask their permission and either pay them or be given it. But that's obviously, with all the hymns that are sung in a church, that's a little cumbersome. So what you can do is go to there's several companies out there that are license agents, and you can buy an annual license. It's usually based on the number of people in your congregation that cover the reproduction for the majority of the modern hymns that are obtained from that agency. You always have to watch, because while I think CCLI has, I don't know, 200, 300,000, and I think pieces of music on file, one license covers, I think, a few more yet. We need to make sure and to report back if you are putting things into a booklet or if you are projecting that. So the final piece that was really why we asked last week, well, what about live streaming? And again, I mentioned SOCAN that covers performance, and SOCAN exists to protect and license creator rights. Historically, SOCAN exempted church worship from performance requirement for performance licenses. And historically, SOCAN has also exempted them from live stream podcasts, video postings like YouTube and those kinds of things. What has happened is, when the recent renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, the deal is now referred to as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, has harmonized the rights. And in short, what happened is that the more liberal application in Canada has now been tightened down to be closer to the more tight versions in the United States. So the net result of that is that church requires a license to cover music that is performed outside of public domain things that are performed on a live stream, on a video recording, a podcast, etc. The good news there is that CCLI and One License, and there's other ones out there, those are the two big ones, they offer an add-on to your existing license that covers live streaming and those types of things. So again, if you are using hymns that require, that aren't public domain, and most churches don't check each hymn to be sure, you do need to apply. Again, the enforcement of this is variable, but they do show up occasionally and check things, and that is one that the recommendation, the legal requirement and recommendation is to have those licenses, either One License or CCLI, and we'll post that. It links for those that don't have it on the diocesan website on the hub, but also to extend that with the add-on for live streaming. And with that, we will turn to questions and answers. The bishop and Archdeacon Varley and I are all available. As always, you can either come off mute and ask a question, or you can also use the chat system here. And Laura Conway will be it will be our congenial to do the mediator here, to do all the work on that, moderator, sorry. And Laura will ask questions that come in off of that link. So we'll open to questions.
Hi, Alex. It's Gary here, Thornhill.
Hey, Gary.
Hi, I've got two questions. The first one's on the licensing. Do you know how often we have to report the hymns that we used? Because I know there's a reporting system, but it doesn't seem too clear to me how often you have to report the hymns. Because in CCLI, you go in, you select the hymns that are not public, well, you actually select all the hymns and it tells you whether it was public domain or not, and you register the hymns you use. Do you know the frequency that has to be done?
So it's changed as well over the bit, and I'm.
What was that part? Well, they can hear me.
Typically, it used to be semi-annual, but I'm just looking here to see. I'm actually looking at their website right as we speak, so I don't speak out of turn. You should report on a regular basis. It says ideally weekly, but my experience was they're either quarterly or semi-annually. Seems to be
That's the
right.
question. I just asked that other bit.
So I think we can hear you, George.
Sorry.
My second question is around the payroll. I received the payroll and I also received the statement, and it shows my SUS credit, but there's no explanation of how that's calculated. Could you just quickly run through what's included and what's not included in the calculation?
Let me just check here. I think is Joyce, are you on the line? Joyce is there.
Yes, I am here. Sorry, it took me a minute to grab my unmute myself. The breakdown will be coming to you, Gary, but there is a maximum of $847 per week, up to 75% of a person's income. But you'll see that on the statement that's coming.
So is everything included, like CPP and employee? No, that wouldn't be included. But the probably health premiums, dental insurance, and housing would be?
It's only the housing and the stipend.
The housing and stipend. Okay, I knew there was some calculations there. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Alec, I have a
Alex,
question.
there are some questions.
Okay, George, go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's George from St. John's. I have a question of the bishop or whoever may answer. If we were to have a funeral service at our church, I'm just saying if, how many people would be allowed to be into that church for that service?
George, the short answer is in that context, you're looking more to the number of 5. The number 10 is applicable to cemeteries and funeral homes.
And we've been looking at, for churches, the number is 5. We've tried to keep that consistent with the gathering, what the province has said about the number of people that would gather. And that's not including any funeral home staff that would be there.
So you're saying, Bishop, that if there was a funeral service in St. John's Anglican Church in Prescott say next week there'd only be 5 people allowed. Now, does that include the clergy?
That would include the clergy, but not funeral home staff. But we are also encouraging people to continue to do graveside services where possible. And there's going to be more and more of these that are coming up as time goes on. And we've had quite a number of them. And I think, Wayne, we changed the protocol last week that clergy contact the archdeacons or yourself, or they can contact me around just to get clarity around these things.
That's right. That's right. So again, George, I'm aware of a funeral ending in Prescott, and I communicated with Tracy. The applicable number is a maximum of 5, including clergy plus funeral staff.
Okay.
And observing
So
all of
if you go ahead, Bishop or Wayne.
No, I just say observing the distancing and the sanitation and all of the things that need to be carefully looked after.
So if that included the funeral, but if the funeral staff didn't remain in the church, would you be able to then have, like, I'm talking 2 ministers and maybe an organist? You might want to have 2 or 3 family members.
Yeah, the total would be 5, but that's not including the funeral home staff, because they're trained on how to deal with these things. If you have to go into the church, I think my recommendation would be that if you can do the service at the graveside, the committal, that would be the best place to do it, rather than have to go through all of the permutations of the church. But if you want to go into the church to do it, the maximum number would be 5, not including the funeral home staff.
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you, Wayne.
Thank you, George.
In answer to Gary Thornhill's question earlier, I just actually, as we were speaking, actually the requirement from CCLI that I'm seeing is every 2.5 years. You can report every week and make it easy, but their maximum is every 2.5 years.
So if you're going to do it every 2.5 years, you would have to keep a running list of every single hymn that is not public domain that you either put on projection or had copied out of some music book other than the hymn book and that.
Correct.
So you might be better to do it. You might be better to do it on a more frequent basis.
That's where every week kind of makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Then it's
Alex,
up on you. Yes.
Charles here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I use CCLI. No, they don't. It's every 2.5 years, but you don't have to report 2.5 years worth of usage. They do it on a sampling basis. So they notify you when you're supposed to report. And when your turn comes up, you're supposed to report. You must report every week for, I don't remember if it's 3 months or 6. I think it's 6, but I don't recall. And so once they tell you to start reporting, you do it until your period comes to an end. And then you can report other times if you want to, but it doesn't really mean anything, and it will not exempt you from being required to report when your turn comes up again. But when you're not in your reporting period, you may or may not keep track, but you will not be asked to come back and report on usage back in a period when you weren't being required to report.
Great. Thank you for the clarity, Charles. That's great. Laura, you mentioned there was a question on the...
Yes, there's a couple. For the hymns used on Easy Worship, is there a license required?
My understanding, I've never used Easy Worship, but my understanding is that it provides formatting and sort of content management side, but I don't believe there was any licensing that was part of their package. I might be wrong. You'd have to check their website, but as I understood it, it was more a formatting and planning tool you use to create it rather than to license it. But you'd have to double check.
You're correct. You're correct, Alex. There's no license associated with it. So if it's a copyrighted hymn, you need to keep track of it.
Okay, there's the answer. Thanks, Gary.
There's a couple more questions on the chat, Alex.
Okay.
This one might actually be for Joyce. So the credit that was applied to the accounts, was this to the parish accounts or the individual church accounts?
It would be applied to whoever receives the actual invoice. So in some cases, the parish receives the payroll invoice, therefore they would receive the credit. In most cases, it's the actual church.
Okay. Alright, you have
I have two more currently on the chat. So there's one, has the diocese applied for any of the 2.5 billion funding being made available to charities from the federal government?
the federal government is certainly from the perspective of these programs like SUS and that we absolutely have. There are another whole chunk of charity and not-for-profit ones where the government's providing support, but those are not available to religious organizations. To the best of our knowledge, and we've done this by collaborating with other dioceses, we have got our oar in the water on any way that we can to generate support.
The last question is for Wayne. Last week you mentioned a ministry and mission survey from the Pandemic Response Task Force. Can you elaborate on the content and the purpose of this survey?
It's a work in progress. That committee met yesterday and will again next week. The survey is based on the Anglican Church's marks of mission, and it borrows from Robert Warren's Healthy Churches Handbook. It continues to be refined. That is the survey. The purpose of it is as a planning document to assist the parishes and our diocese in looking ahead while we are in the midst of the current situation. So it's for the use of the parishes. Secondly, as you know, there's a church support fund being established, and the information from parishes will assist the diocese through Synod Council in being able to provide financial support to ministry and mission opportunities in the diocese.
Thanks, Wayne. Any other questions?
Alex, it's Fred Butler. Is the CCLI, is that just a website? Can that be found on in the diocese somewhere?
Yep, it can be found. If you do a Google search on CCLI, you'll pop it up. We'll put the links on the diocesan page, along with some guideline pieces. There are several different licensing. I mean, part of it depends on what kind of music you use and what, where some of that comes from. So there are one license was a merger of, I don't know, Sing, and I forget who the other one was. So there are a couple of options out there, different commercial terms, and they cover sort of different bits of music. So we'll put those links up, but you can look and choose which one best suits you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have anything? We still have a couple of minutes. Anybody have anything that they'd like to share, or do we have? Again, the bishop has mentioned we're starting to look at, how that path is going to to work. And I think his example of his analogy of the rheostat's a good one. But there are still lots of good things happening today. And of course, where you have good things happening today or things you want people to be aware of, please do pass those along to Mark Hauser. We continue to publish e-news every week. We continue to the dialogue will continue to come out. So it's important that we communicate across, and we get focused on the harder things, but there's still a lot of wonderful blessings that come to our lives as churches. So please make sure you pass things along to Mark.
I can add in too, Alec, one of the things that's happening, I have a couple of calls now. Feast of Pentecost is coming up, and we're doing a suggestion in the conversation with the bishops to do a Pentecost service involving all 7 of the dioceses in the ecclesiastical province of Ontario. So the liturgical officers have been meeting, and Mark has been on that meeting as well, looking to put together a service. It'd be kind of similar in some ways to what we did in the diocese for Easter Sunday, but it'll kick off with our Metropolitan Anne Germain offering a reflection and a bidding, and then each diocese has a 5-minute portion through it, and then there will be a concluding piece, and it'll work kind of like either the Stations of the Cross or a festival of lessons and carols, the same kind of idea around that. And that's on Pentecost Sunday. That's going to go up at 2:00 in the afternoon, and we'll be doing some advertising for that and putting the word out around it. I'm kind of excited about the possibility of what this will offer. I've been doing a weekly morning prayers service, and so on that Sunday I won't be doing that. We'll be putting that Pentecost service up. So really looking forward, and thanks to the ones who are on that. So that's something that's kind of exciting coming up. I'm also working through calling the clergy of the diocese. I'm partway through the list, just touching base. How are things going? But one of the things that I really want to accentuate, because I forgot to mention this when I was doing my check-in with you, is that, and this comes up in each of the bishops in our reporting back among us ourselves, is that right now the clergy in particular working, it is a challenge. When you get a phone call and the first thing you want to do, you have a parishioner that's in the hospital or in the ICU, it may not have anything to do with COVID-19, just in a normal course of things, or there's a funeral, and your natural reaction as clergy is to want to go out and to be with the people and to be with those who are grieving, and to not be able to do that, it's stressful. And I know the clergy have been working very hard in how to continue to communicate, how to continue to provide worship, working together with the lay leaders to hold things together. So I want to make sure that and the other part of it that's a bit of a challenge, we're all working from home. And so, there's home and there's work, and how do you keep the boundary between the two? And in some cases, you're homeschooling children, so there's home, work, school, everything is all in one place. And I want to make sure that and when I'm talking to the clergy, that they take the time for rest, refreshment, and renewal. Now that we're more into a marathon stride with this thing, people have sort of developed how they're working through it. It's not sort of the initial first few weeks when it's, oh my heavens, nothing is normal, and how are we going to deal with this? We're into a stride. So I'm encouraging clergy, think about your vacation time when you want to look at your vacation time, and to do that. There's ways in which you can get your colleagues to cover off emergencies that come up in the parish using the COVID pieces. And the other beautiful part of it is that normally when I was parish priest, go away on vacation, you'd line up the worship leaders over the course of the week. Now you have a whole veritable buffet of worship opportunities for your parishioners to, I saw a phrase came up called sermon surfing. And so people are some people are spending the day going to different parishes and tying into that. So there's worship opportunities for the people of the parish that you can direct them to. But I just want to make sure that everyone's taking the time to do the things they need to do, but make sure that they're caring for themselves, because every line has gotten blurred as we move into 3 months of this. So I'll continue with those calls. Each day I try to make a few more and touch base, but I just want to put that out there too today on this call.
The other thing, Bishop, maybe if you mention of it, there is another service will happen on Pentecost Sunday as well, later in the day.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mentioned last week too, and we're continuing to hold our colleague, my new colleague, Shane Parker, new Bishop of Ottawa, who will be consecrated a bishop. And now it's becoming clearer. They were hoping, not too sure what they could do, but it's going to be, a gathering in the cathedral. There will be 5 people present. In order to make a new bishop, you have to have 3 other bishops. And so I'm going to have the privilege. I don't know how this happened. I'm coming up next month on the 11th of June. I'll be 9 years since I was consecrated bishop. I don't know where that time went. Just zip. But anyway, I'm now the senior bishop in the province of Ontario. So as senior bishop by consecration, I'll be present. Our Metropolitan Anne Germain will be the consecrating bishop. And also Bishop John Baycroft, who is a former Bishop of Ottawa and a mentor to Dean Parker, will be the other one. So the 3 of us, and what will happen is we all come in the cathedral for our various pieces. So readers will come in and exit the building. Bishops will walk in, do their thing, exit the building to make sure we're observing all of the distancing protocols. But in any event, it'll be all live streamed. And if you want to watch it, it'll be on the Diocese of Ottawa website on the 31st. They've got a group coming in to set up good, solid recording equipment so that they have a good record of the consecration of their new bishop. So please hold Bishop-elect Parker and the people of the Diocese of Ottawa in your prayers. And I haven't got in my brain whether it's 5 in the afternoon or 7 in the evening, but the day will be there. It's later on in the afternoon on Pentecost Sunday, 31st.
Okay, well, thank you, folks. We will again gather next Friday afternoon at the usual 2 o'clock and share what is new and answer questions again. Bishop, can we turn back to you for a closing prayer, please?
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we come to this weekend and we come to this 6th Sunday in the season of Easter, which is Rogation Sunday. And we give thanks because you are indeed the one that plants the good seed. And we give thanks for the ministry that we're called to share. And we ask that that good seed that is planted in our hearts and souls be shown forth in action as we carry out our mission and ministry, even in these extraordinary times. As we move through the Rogation days to Ascension Thursday and beyond to the great feast of Pentecost on the 31st, we give thanks once more for your Spirit that attends us. Blessings and thank you for those who have been on this call today, for the leadership that we provide and the people we are called to serve. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good, safe weekend. Happy
Have a good long weekend staycation.
Be safe.
Thanks, Alex.
Happy long
I'll just stay
weekend.